Take a look at what happened.
This moment changed the 2024 U.S. presidential race. And these moments...
with COVID,
But so did this moment.
Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. We're going to beat President Putin. President Zelensky.
And obviously this moment.
Not since Lyndon B. Johnson has a sitting president of the United States made the decision mid-campaign to not seek re-election. That's exactly what President Biden has done, throwing his endorsement behind Vice President Kamala Harris.
It is my great honor to have Joe's endorsement.
I'm proud to strongly endorse Kamala Harris.
With Democrats rallying behind Kamala Harris, the winning streak Trump was on suddenly ground to a halt. And Trump, a twice-impeached convicted felon, who was also found liable for sexual abuse, now finds himself facing off against a former prosecutor and attorney general.
I will proudly put my record against his any day of the week.
The Trump campaign have really tried to lash Biden and Harris together. They would essentially run the same playbook with Harris.
Despite the fact that the U.S. economy is booming, that inflation is coming down, that the stock market has hit record highs this year, Americans are still angry about the state of the economy. They're resentful of inflation and high prices. They don't see those falling, and it's very clear that they blame Joe Biden for the state of affairs.
His White House was the people who coined the term Bidenomics. There's been tons of bright spots. The unemployment rate is low. Wages have risen. They've done things like fix roads and bridges. They've brought broadband to more communities. I mean, there are just a ton of wins, but they have a very hard time communicating those wins.
Certainly, there are going to be tens of millions of Americans that are motivated by concerns over abortion, over the environment, over immigration, over just having Donald Trump back in the White House.
But with swing state voters, I think that message, it definitely resonates, but not as much as other things.
I proudly accept your nomination for President of the United States.
Part of Trump's appeal with voters has been his transformative effect on the Republican Party.
Trump has remade the Republican Party in his own image. It's almost like he's God to the Republican Party. And I would say in the wake of the assassination attempt, it's even more so.
Where Trumpism differs from kind of traditional Reagan-style conservative is that it's far more populist, not necessarily in terms of policy, but rhetorically it's become more anti-Wall Street, more anti-rich. And you can see the way that that resonates with the enormous rally crowds that Trump gets, despite the fact that he has a wealthy, privileged background as a Manhattan developer.
Enough was enough!
If you see the kind of wild pageantry of the convention with pro wrestlers and Kid Rock, it's clear kind of visually and policy-wise that this is just an entirely different Republican Party that reflects and revolves around Donald Trump and what he wants it to be.
It's really been a mix of, luck, but also just having a good operation and a well-oiled machine this time. It's much different than the teams around him in 2016 and 2020. A lot of the fringe characters like General Michael Flynn or Steve Bannon, Roger Stone, they're still around and they still have access to Trump, but they are not actually running things.
Susie Wiles and Chris LaCivita, the two people atop Trump's campaign, are seasoned Republican professionals. They're not kind of weird figures from the MAGA media universe. Every Republican professional who wants to advance in that party understands that they need to work for Trump, they need to be in Trump's good graces.
Trump is really an isolationist. He has long thought that Republicans should not get involved in policing the world. You have to remember that Republicans got Americans into the Iraq War. I was part of a team from Bloomberg Business Week that went down to Mar-a-Lago a few weeks ago for an exclusive interview with Donald Trump. And one thing he said was that he did not think that the U.S. needed to be an insurance policy for Taiwan anymore. He said that they stole the chips business from the U.S. He loves tariffs. He doesn't love sanctions, so I think he could pull down the sanctions for Russia.
Trump's foreign policy and rhetorical populism aside, as president, he did achieve some long-term goals for the GOP, starting with the Supreme Court.
Conservatives have been engaged in a multi-decade-long effort to take control of the federal judiciary, and they've now succeeded all the way up to the level of the Supreme Court.
So help me God.
Donald Trump really remade the Supreme Court in his first term. You have to remember that he nominated and got confirmed 3 conservative Supreme Court justices. We saw them upend reproductive rights in this country, which is something that Republicans have long wanted. We have seen them really support the Second Amendment. And then we also saw them uphold this whole idea of presidential immunity, which really helps Trump in all of these various legal challenges he has. He had a White House counsel named Don McGahn who was really focused on remaking the judiciary, as was at the time Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. And the two of them were really the architects behind confirming and appointing a whole raft of conservative justices through all of the lower courts, the appellate courts. That has a much greater legacy because these are people that can serve on the bench for the lifetime. They can rule, as we saw, in Trump's favor with the classified documents case in Florida. Trump appointees on the courts are threading the needle of the Republican agenda. We saw that most particularly with this decision on the Chevron case. It had to do with whether or not the federal agencies are able to make policy, and it means that these agencies can't make these rules and regulations as easily. That is a huge achievement for the Republican policy agenda.
The GOP agenda is whatever Trump wants the agenda to be. And from everything we know about Trump, it means higher tariffs around the globe. It means draconian immigration restrictions, deportations. It means loosening of regulations. It means more drilling for oil and energy domestically.
We want growth in our country. That's what's going to pay off our debt.
Another Trump priority would be making his tax cuts, which mostly helped corporations and the wealthy, permanent. It's an idea that's widely popular with Republicans, even though, according to the Congressional Budget Office, it would add billions to the already ballooning federal debt.
Trump is very eager to extend his 2017 tax cuts, and he wants to cut the corporate tax rate even further from 21% to 20%. That's the official policy proposal put out by his campaign. He told Bloomberg Businessweek he'd like to bring them down to 15%. It's something Trump cares a lot about. It's something that the business people in his ear want him to do.
The prospect of corporate tax cuts has spurred prominent business figures to make hefty donations.
We've really seen donors come out in full force for Trump. And I would say the most prominent of those is Elon Musk. But honestly, a lot of the billionaires were already moving in the direction of Trump.
If you look at the pattern of Trump's fundraising, it had been going really poorly for most of 2024. Trump is a rich guy with a big ego who doesn't like asking people for money. The big thing to change that was Trump's conviction on 34 felony counts in Manhattan. Immediately after that, you saw money pouring in, not just from small dollar donors, but big, important donors who were willing to write 6- and 7-figure checks.
The Democrats responded in June, dramatically ramping up spending. And the announcement of Harris's candidacy raised more than $100 million in 2 days, mostly from small donors. Through it all, it's become clear that a lot of money will be spent to control Washington.
The key to making anything happen in Washington for any president in this polarized day and age is that you need to have complete control of Washington. So if Trump wins, if Republicans win the House and Senate, Trump will be able to do basically anything he wants to.